Today on the State of the Nation, we have the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance in the South African Parliament, and that is Siviwe Gwarube. Siviwe, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to get you here and in person. This is great.
Yeah.
Because you have been doing a lot of work in Parliament.
Yeah.
It seems like you must have your lawyers' phone numbers on speed dial.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of legal action that seems to be part of what happens. Explain to us how it happens that you're in Parliament, which is meant to be a whole lot of parliamentarians discussing the best outcomes for South Africa, but you spend so much time having to institute legal action.
Yeah.
Where's the system going wrong?
Yeah. And that's a very good question. And I think to start off, I think it's important to state that one of my big frustrations in our South African politics is the fact that the people are often completely absent in the decision making of politicians. The reason why I say that, I think a lot of South Africans don't understand that Parliament is not necessarily just a place where politicians go to work. It's actually their institution. And that they have the power to hire and fire the people who are there. The 400 people there are not just, the special chosen few. They are the people that have been sent there to represent them. And one of my dreams one day is for South Africa to get to a place where South Africans realize the power of their vote and realize that actually it is them who can change what that composition in Parliament looks like, what those numbers look like. Which brings me to your question. Part of the reason why a lot of some of the battles we fight in Parliament end up in court is because, of course, the ANC enjoys a huge majority in Parliament. So, and we collectively, as the opposition, are just under 120 out of the 400 members of Parliament. And yes, they've got some supporters of smaller parties, but they actually don't even need the smaller parties to pass anything through, unless there's a special majority requirement. For instance, the appointment of the Inspector General of the Intelligence Inspector General, and other appointments such as a public protector that requires a 2/3 majority. So they only really need any of us to conduct the business of Parliament when there's a 2/3 majority that is needed. Other than that, they can pass legislation, vote down anything they want. And that's part of the problem, because we can't simply sit as the opposition and simply say we don't have enough numbers and allow problematic pieces of legislation that either don't meet constitutional muster or that could be incredibly detrimental. For instance, the national health insurance, that could have, massive repercussions for ordinary South Africans who rely on the public health system if that kind of legislation goes through. So we often have to rely on the courts to point out where the system has gone wrong, whether or not processes have been followed. It's imperfect. In that, for me, my preference would be a far more robust Parliament where the best ideas win, where we can convince each other, regardless of where we sit politically. But if I come up with a solution to a problem that we have as a country, that we may be able to have those conversations. And our politics has become so incredibly politicized and politically polarized that we don't have those conversations that I often think we ought to be having.
Yeah, now you can easily put our Parliament into two phases. It is pre the arms deal and post the arms deal, right? The arms deal was the moment that, what was her name, the original ANC speaker,
Dr. Frenajinwala,
right,
yeah,
where she gave up on her principles, stopped being an impartial speaker in Parliament, and did everything to protect the ANC. From that moment on, there's all conversation has stopped. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Because before then there was that robust conversation and decision making.
Absolutely, and the reason why I agree with you is because when when Dr. Janwala died, of course, I wasn't serving in Parliament at the time. So I had to do a lot of reading around, some of what the original Parliament looked like and some of the work that was done, straight after 1994. And I was in awe of just how the incredible amount of work that went into building that institution. And it breaks my heart to realize that over the past 15 to sort of 20 years, the institution has been completely hollowed out. Parliament is now basically a retirement village for failed politicians elsewhere by the ANC. So if you were a premier somewhere in a province and we needed to shift you, we'll make you a member of Parliament. You'll become a chairperson of a portfolio committee. And it is not the place where we are there to hold government accountable. There's so much work that Parliament can do to improve the lives of South Africans if I think the composition there was different, which is why I think, I'm excited about the prospect of a 2024 where the ANC dips below 50%, because what that means is that even if they don't dip all the way to, to the point of, 40% or 30%, whatever the because pollsters differ on where they are sitting. But the prospect of them dipping below 50% is exciting for me because for the first time, not everything that's discussed in Parliament will be a foregone conclusion. If there's legislation we don't agree with, when we can't have the robust discussion and we can have a vote that is not simply just dominated by the numbers. And even in the NCOP, in the National Council of Provinces, because the house there is composed of the different representatives from the provinces, even that will be slightly different. So immediately I think it will inject a certain level of energy in that institution that hasn't been there for a while. And I think hopefully it will let South Africans see that is the place where the issues they care about the most should be debated. The issues that really touch their lives, the solutions should be essentially, past there. We shouldn't be having different conversations about things that don't matter to South Africans.
Yeah, and of course this manifests in a few ways. And I mean, you now see this started off, I suppose, in the Thabo Mbeki era, but Jacob Zuma and, of course, Cyril Ramaphosa has been almost a mirror image of, a carbon copy, one should say, of Jacob Zuma. And that is that the president doesn't have any debate. He answers questions. Now, answering questions that are given to you is a very different thing from having a debate.
No, absolutely. And that's part of the reason why we've been trying to change the rules. But again, the frustration is, even if we had a whole raft when I started being the chief whip. The first things I wanted to do was to come up with basically a discussion paper on how we can reform Parliament to make it, and we called it transforming Parliament from being a lapdog to a watchdog, right? So that it can be a lot more robust than it currently is. And so we found ways in which we can change the rules, certain things, small wins that we can get along the way. But every single time we try to change a rule that may seem simply innocuous to you, it was blocked by the ANC. The ANC has a blanket rule. They don't support anything that does not come from the ANC. It doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't matter how beneficial it is. Look at the fact that they support the bills that I've brought on board around stabilizing coalition governments. They don't care the fact that they literally are agreeing with every single part of the points in those bills. If it doesn't come from the ANC, they don't support it. So the issue around oversight over the president is a very important one, because our argument has been that the president only comes once a quarter to answer questions in the House. Then he'll come during the State of the Nation address and deliver a speech, and then he will listen to a debate and he will respond to a debate. There's hardly any rigorous sort of oversight over the president. Now, here's a problem with also President Cyril Ramaphosa and what he's managed to do that his predecessor didn't do, is that he has created such a bloated presidency with so many ministers and deputy ministers that without a portfolio committee that oversees that presidency, that now essentially amasses a huge budget, we've got this entire sort of presidency that has no accounting body. So we can't simply, summon those DGs to ask, what does the deputy minister of, monitoring and evaluation do that is different from what the minister does? So we can't ask the questions around why is this money spent this way? It's because the president, because I suspect he has very little confidence in the cabinet he's put together, and that actually that cabinet has been a consequence of political, sort of negotiation and political concessions he's had to make, to the point where he's now surrounded himself with advisors and all these people who don't account to Parliament. And that's a big problem, because the president mustn't, it's not just him, it's the entire presidency and the program of action that they have going there. And so that's part of one of the things that I'm hoping to reheat in the 7th term.
Yeah. Now, just by way of comparison, that is at local government level. That is when somebody in power prefers to use a consultant rather than the person who's being paid to do that very job. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So you get somebody from outside, your mate that you've got some faith in, to do the job that the finance MMC should be doing, because the finance MMC is either absent or doesn't know how to read a balance sheet. So let's talk about Parliament, because you've obviously, at the moment, probably the best person to talk about what Parliament could look like after next year. Now, we've been strident on this platform to say, that 2024, in fact, I'm going to go and take issue with what some of the other people have done. We were the first people to say that 2024 is going to be more important than 1994, and now it's being used by other parties. But go back, we've got the videos. But the point is that it's a very important election, because there's a couple of scenarios that I want to throw at you, and I want to just know so people can understand what the parliamentary implication is. So let's talk about the parliamentary implication of the ANC doing a little better than the pollsters are forecasting, and they get 50% plus one. What does Parliament look like thereafter if they get 50% plus one?
Look, I mean, that's obviously, as the official opposition, that's something that we don't want. But effectively, what it would mean is they'll be able to elect their own speaker without necessarily needing any help from anyone. And they would be able to essentially elect and select all the chairs of portfolio committees. Because one of the things that Zondo, in his state capture report, recommended was, why don't portfolio committees be chaired by opposition members, so that you can have better accountability? But the ANC has rejected that entirely. So if they get 50 plus 1, the status quo will remain. Okay. But where I think the slight differences would be is that, remember, the ANC is also not united in some of the issues that come to Parliament. For instance, some of them were divided around, Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. Some of them were divided around the Phala matter. So there would be slight nuances in the sense that we could potentially see where different factions of the ANC don't agree, and where they don't agree, they may not always vote together, or they may be absent. We can also break the quorum. Those are some of the things that we can do, because the ANC doesn't like going to Parliament. And so those are the things, but it's not ideal. It doesn't go far enough.
But it does significantly weaken what is a complete stranglehold on Parliament. Interestingly, you talk about parliamentary committees. We have in the past seen a few parliamentary committees headed up by opposition politicians, but they're usually from the entrepreneurial parties, aren't they? Has the DA ever headed up a parliamentary committee?
No. So what usually what the ANC would do is they would, you'll remember Themba Godi, who used to chair SCOPA for a very long time. And this
but he came from one of those entrepreneurial
parties.
parties.
And so now you've got Mkhuleko Hlengwa, and I must give credit to him. It's a lot less lapdoggy under his leadership, and there has been some tough questions, particularly asked when they were dealing with ESCOM in particular. But so where we govern in the Western Cape, SCOPA in particular is chaired by the main opposition party, and simply because it's important. It's an important committee that is meant to be doing proper oversight. Okay. And I think we should make it a tradition and a convention in South Africa. Because what are we afraid of?
I mean, that's what happens in the US, isn't it?
Because what are we afraid of? I mean, if an opposition member chairs a committee, you still have the numbers in the committee, but we just need to ask the tough questions. You know, ministers come to portfolio committees if they decide to, show up in Parliament. They'll probably simply join in on Zoom. They'll have connectivity issues. The DG will give a 150-page PowerPoint presentation. The minister will give closing remarks. You ask questions, and they'll say, some of the questions that they can't answer, they'll send in writing if it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a completely inefficient way of doing business.
So now let's talk about some of the other scenarios. The ANC dipping below 50%. But being able to cobble together with those entrepreneurial parties. People don't know what I'm talking about as an entrepreneurial party. The best example of that at the moment is somebody like Patricia de Lille. She will sell her vote for a parliamentary position as long as she's okay. She doesn't care. She's been a bad minister in 2 portfolios. She says she's wants clean governance, but then she allows theft in her own departments, in her own parliamentary portfolios. So she's hardly a honest broker. She's just might as well just join the ANC.
Yeah. It's probably easier.
Yeah, it would probably be easier. But so let's just say they get that sort of 46%. One would imagine they can get Patricia de Lille, Cope, Bantu Alamisa, all these people who have only got one source of income, which is their reputation. And I presume then it looks pretty similar to the 50% plus one situation.
It does. Look, with also a slightly more, I suppose, also more wiggle room, because one of the things that I've really tried to work hard at is also trying to reach particularly the other political parties that are represented in Parliament. So it will look pretty much like the 50 plus one, perhaps with a little bit more wiggle room, depending on what the ANC offers those political parties, right? So, for instance, if they offer them positions like chairs or positions in government, I suspect that we will be really at the 50 plus one, unless they have a voting arrangement, which can then be broken from time to time, right?
Yes.
But if they offer positions, then, as you say, for instance, as you made the example with Good and Patricia, the Good Party votes with the ANC every single time. And even when things are absolutely egregious, they'd rather than, either abstain but literally they have, if you look at their voting record, including on Phala Phala, it's been with the ANC. So those political parties, it will definitely look like the 50 plus one scenario, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions where we can maybe make some compelling arguments to somebody to switch their vote.
And I suppose the same can be said of UDM and Bantu Alamisa. He also just supports the ANC. He says he's not going to, but he always does.
Yeah. And I mean, for instance, that's what I'm saying with slight sort of differentiators, because, for instance, the UDM voted for the Phala Phala report to be taken further in Parliament. So it depends what the ANC offers some of those political parties, which will either buy them favor or not.
Okay, so now let's get on to another scenario, and that is that the ANC now needs a bigger partner. Right now, there's obviously 3 names that come up when one talks about a bigger partner, and in a way, I suppose from their side, that may appear to be a bit cleaner. Right, one is, and we have had Velenkosini Tlabisa on here a few times. He assures me completely that he would never be in coalition with the ANC, but yet they backed the new public protector, the appointment of the new public protector, despite the fact that she goes into her post with a big black mark next to her name. Do you think that the IFP will be able to resist the advances of the ANC?
I really, really hope that they do. I think that the IFP, and I think the reason why that I'm hopeful that they will is because the IFP is really instrumental to our some of our ambitions in KwaZulu-Natal in particular. We've piloted a number of co-governing arrangements there, and we can take KZN away from the ANC. And it would be rather strange to co-govern in KwaZulu-Natal with the DA, for instance, and then perhaps go into some kind of voting bloc arrangement with the ANC in Parliament. I don't think that's sustainable. So I really, really hope that, because they're also part of the Multiparty Charter, there has been a commitment to say that we will be working together as this bloc of political parties. So I really hope that that is the case, because I think that there's something that's happening in KZN that can really, really surprise voters and really work for the better.
Then, of course, there's the big question, and understandably so, and that is around the EFF, because already the ANC is in many coalitions, and it's a natural partnership. And I do understand that there's a natural partnership, but, and the big but probably comes from the ANC rather than from the EFF, right?
Yeah.
The but being that if you're an ANC realist, you realize that the EFF has more energy and more youth and more everything that you don't have, and it would be a reverse takeover, one would imagine. But do you think that that they will hold their nose and go into coalition with the EFF?
I think it's very possible. I think out of the scenarios that we're going to discuss is probably one of the most likely. The EFF may also play hard to get and say, well, we're not going to go into a formal arrangement with you. We'll go into a voting arrangement with you. Because they're very extractive as a political party. And so they're either going to demand a lot more than what the ANC is willing to give, which is perhaps cabinet positions, chairs of, potentially. And I mean, as you know, I like to imagine the EFF as ANC Youth League in exile. I mean, I have never met a political party that has more interest in the ANC than that party. I mean, they back certain candidates. They have preferred sort of presidential candidates. It's wild to me. I mean, if you're a real opposition party, focus on your own knitting. But clearly, it's clear to me, and Julius Malema has been on record having said that he will be the president of the ANC one day. So as much as they flip-flop, I think, I would not be quick to dismiss that kind of, blind ambition. And so I think that they will probably not just come to Parliament and say, we'll vote with you to get you over the line. They'll be incredibly extractive from the ANC. They'll demand a lot more to say, well, look, you are sitting at 42%. And we are maybe sitting at 8 to 10%. You need us. And so we want all of these things, and we also want Paul Matshatile as the president. And so I think, that's part of the reason the ANC's but is not altruistic or even, a matter of trying to, look out for good governance. Not at all. Their but is because they are worried of the demands that the EFF may have. Because you've seen this Tom and Jerry dance they've had over the past decade. So, I think it's highly likely, but I think that they're going to have to give up a lot more for the EFF to come on board. And it's likely going to really cause ructions within the party, because there are people within the ANC who don't think that the EFF and a partnership with the EFF is a good idea. But, they are
But they're generally the old guard that have already stolen their money, so they don't. You take it from whence it comes. When suddenly Kgalema Motlanthe starts acting like Saint Kgalema, you've got to be very worried, because he's got he also has a closet. And then of course when one talks about coalitions, it's been mooted in many different places about something that is done, and whatever the reason is, maybe in the interests of South Africa, that there be an ANC Democratic Alliance coalition. Speak to these people out there. Tell us about that potential Goldilocks thing where you guys come in there, do all the hard work, put the country straight, and they're the leaders. And St. Cyril sits over there and gives you a pat on the head.
Yeah. I know a lot of, and I don't want to just simply, give, sort of a political answer, because I know a lot of South Africans are really, really, really worried about the country. And as somebody who does not have a plan B, or doesn't have a secret passport somewhere else, I too am worried about South Africa, right? So I want to lead with that, to say that I understand why people are scared. I understand why people are worried and how rapid the decline has been. But the problem with going into a coalition with the ANC is what the opposition party in Zimbabwe probably encountered, is that you get into bed with, an organization that is completely has no moral compass at all. And what ends up happening is that you end up being swallowed in, and you end up being complicit in some of the decision making that will be there. So, if the president can get a second term and get a second mandate from his own political party, you would assume that he would be brave enough to say, I'm firing so-and-so, I've got enough evidence. The very same commission that was commissioned and has found these people to be guilty, or at the very least has found them to have some serious questions to be answered. I'm not going to sit with them around the cabinet, table. So how then do you go into a coalition with a political party like that? Because if he's at the helm, he is not brave enough or courageous enough or, quite frankly, moved enough to do the right thing. And I just worry that we would be completely swallowed up by the ANC and its machinery. And how do we then call for a cleaner public service? How do we call for banning of, cadre deployment? How do we call for, better economic policies that treat the public sector as a partner rather than, an enemy, as Minister Kumbuzo says that the private sector is trying to collapse the country. How then do you move a party that is so completely bereft of new ideas, innovation, and they are a relic of the past? How do you move them to 2023 and help them move with the urgency that they need?
Okay, so then let's talk about parties that won't move with the urgency that the country needs. And let's get a little bit closer to home. One can only speculate what a DA what share of the vote the DA could command if it didn't have its own foot shooting competition over the last couple of years, right? Where, Musi, Lindiwe Mazibuko, you can carry on, where it's extremely difficult to not see this as an absolute war on any black member other than yourself, right, of any consequence, right, within the party, and has made the party almost unelectable by the majority of the country. Surely the Democratic Alliance must be. You can't be that removed from the realities in South Africa. I've asked Helen Ziller this, and I'm still haven't quite got an answer that I could live with. What is the thinking there, that you could take a position, you could have a party that is so bad in charge, like the ANC, an electorate that is so angry with the ANC, so ready to vote for somebody else, and say, well, to hell with what would make you want to vote for us. We are just going to sit in the corner, if you don't mind, and just self-mutilate. Where does the DA go from here? I mean, do you think that what is it now, about 5-6% whites, maybe 4% Indians, do you think they're going to get you over the line?
Look, I mean, first of all, I must then first say that, I mean, you can't be a 22% party and just have white people voting for you. There's just simply, the maths, doesn't add up. There simply aren't that many enough white people.
Yeah, do you have somebody that you could tell? Anyway, okay, yeah.
So I think we should accept that, I mean, our voting base is made up of very diverse South Africans. I think there was a poll, a study that was done, and now I apologize, I can't remember it, but where it said 30% of the voters of the DA were Indian South Africans, colored South Africans, white South Africans, and black South Africans. And for me, firstly, I was like, well, that's a pretty diverse political party, but
not really, is it?
Well, it is. I mean,
it's diverse if because we're still using those apartheid classifications. If 25% of the population was populated by those particular segments, then we'd call it diverse.
Yeah. So look, I want to now move to your question about what gets you over the line, right? I think what's going to have to get us over the line is, one, accepting where our blind spots are. I think that we've got to understand that there's a trust deficit that has grown over the years, either as a consequence of our history in South Africa, where particularly a lot of black South Africans are distrusting of white leaders. And and it is true, and you can't wish it away. That trust deficit is there. It exists as a consequence of what apartheid did to us, right? So here comes a political party that says, well, we want to do something different. We want to bring across different South Africans under one umbrella, and we want to have a truly non-racial party. All other political parties talk about non-racialism, but quite frankly, they don't mean it. Even the ANC talks about non-racialism, but nobody really tries to live it. And it's difficult, Mike. It is difficult when you are bringing different people from different race groups, but different backgrounds, under one political party, under one liberal organization, and trying to move towards a common goal. It is difficult because of our history. But we are trying to do it, and it's imperfect. Yes, as you said.
How are you trying to do it? Because it looks like you're trying to do exactly the opposite. It almost feels to me that there's a sort of a collective sigh of relief when another black high-profile leader leaves the party.
Not at all.
I mean, surely, somebody there has to pick up a newspaper or just, live life in South Africa. Or do you think that the party is so stuck in their little enclave in Cape Town that they don't understand how the country is actually running?
No, I don't think so at all. I think there's a recognition within the leadership of the DA that we can't simply be governing. We govern well, excellently, and of course we can do better in the Western Cape and in Cape Town. But to truly show South Africans that we can be a party of national government, we've got to step out of that. And that was why it was important for us to, in spite of the fact that not having gotten outright majorities, get involved in those coalition governments. And yes, harsh lessons were learned there. So I think it's not fair to say that we're only keen to kind of stick to our little enclave in the Western Cape. I don't know about other people, but I certainly don't want to be part of a regional organization. And that's why we've, also rejected advances by people like Cape Exit, who say, you should kind of cessate, because we need to save South Africa in its entirety. So let me go back to the point I was trying to make about moving as a non-racial organization towards a common goal of saving South Africa and restoring South Africa. It's difficult, Mike, because when people in the DA disagree and people decide to leave, people say, here's a race war. When people in the DA, somebody says, I no longer think that politics is the vehicle for change. Somebody like Mbalintuli, for instance, decides to go to a grassroots organization. Somebody says, a black exodus. So I do think we're held at a far greater standard, and that's fine. That's all right. But I don't think that we should diminish the people who do stay and the people who do the hard yards. But the DA has to grow in 2024. There's no two ways about it. If we don't grow and we regress as we did in 2019, then our critics are going to say, surely you are not giving South Africans who are so desperate, who are so angry with the ANC, an alternative. And this is how we've got to have to sell what we are able to do. What we've got to be able to say to South Africans is that here's a party, imperfect as it is, of a group of people who, what we are trying to do is we're trying to create a better life where you live. If you live under a DA government, your life will be intrinsically better. A lot less people will be unemployed. We will make sure that your streets are clean. And these are the things that are strong attributes. And any company has to campaign on the strong attributes, Mike.
Well, I tell you, there's probably a number of people joining us here from Tshwane and Johannesburg that have lived under DA led coalitions and saw no improvement whatsoever, and saw petty squabbling, saw no diplomacy, saw no leadership, and saw no, let's call it, no stomach for the fight. And, I recently sat down here with Solium Samanga, and, he wants to show me WhatsApps and look what time, and this. Come on, this is our lives. You had a chance to retake Johannesburg, in whatever form. Suddenly we are arguing about what time a WhatsApp was sent on a WhatsApp group. Weren't you also part of the WhatsApp group? Couldn't you lead the process? So I'm starting to wonder, you talk about your performance in the next election, and I'm trying to see how it would be possible for the DA to improve on even 2019's poor showing. I can't see where that would come.
I think, firstly, I'm, I don't want to be another Terra Lukota and say
Yeah.
I'll eat my hat.
Yeah.
But I mean, the people who are well versed in how these things work, our polling is showing that we are certainly doing much better than we were doing in 2019. And of course, the election campaign hasn't kicked off in earnest, and will be squeezed by the ANC when they eventually start to wake up to the fact that there's an election next year. But at the end of the day, we are confident that we've stabilized. And remember, I mean, we're coming from some pretty dark times where we had a leader who resigned, and most political parties don't come back from that, right?
Yeah.
And we stabilized, and we are now at a point where we are showing growth. But here's what I think. You're asking me, how do you think you will grow? Do you know how I think you will grow, Mike? I think for the first time, we've got 27 million South Africans, right? Half of them are unregistered and didn't show up to vote.
Surely you must hope that they stay away, because if they do come, it's hard to see them buying what you're selling.
But this is what I'm telling you, what we're going to be selling, right?
Okay.
So here's this 27 million people. About half of them are unregistered, and about half of them are registered but did not show up to vote. And what I think this election is going to have to be about is showing South Africans that there's a direct correlation between how you vote and how you live. And of course, we've got to take on the criticism that where you were part of a coalition government, things didn't get better. But we have to make the argument that, well, those were imperfect because we were not able to, implement DA policy. But it is undeniable that where we have governed as the sole political party, we've improved the lives of mostly poor black South Africans. The fact that we're spending 1.2 billion rand in the Western Cape education department to catch up kids who have lost on schooling time over COVID is a testament to the fact that the DA doesn't want to create an entire generation of poor black kids who are essentially getting inferior education. It is the very DA who's asking these questions to the ministers in parliament who are saying, cut VAT on certain things and increase the child grant because we're seeing unprecedented levels of child stunting. We, as a political party, have to show South Africans that, you know what, if you're poor and unemployed, the DA is actually your best shot. And I know it may sound unbelievable, but those are the facts. It's born from the facts. It's born from our policy positions on these things, on the safety net, on growing jobs. And that, for me, is what we've got to do. Because I've seen in my own family, Mike, where people now are a lot less nostalgic about what has happened in the past, and they're a lot more agitated and they're a lot more desperate about what's going to happen in the now. And I think that's where, for me, the DA needs to fill that gap, to say we also have a proven track record. Unlike other political parties, we've got new entrants in the market. And unlike other people who say, we shouldn't have a new entrants in the market, I don't believe that. I think it's a consequence of a growing democracy. But what we do have over and above those other people is the fact that we've got a proven track record of what we can do. And it's going to be hard work. And we're going to have to deal with that trust deficit, but we're going to have to deal with it head on. I think I can't come here and say to you, oh, there isn't a problem, and that there aren't sentiments in South Africa that say, is the DA diverse really enough? Can I see myself represented in the DA? Of course, we must ask those questions because South Africans live in that context. They view the country in that prism. I
directly asked that question of Helen Zille, and she said she doesn't see the problem.
Well, look, I mean, you're asking me,
yes.
And this is my view. My view is that you've got to, while you are, yes, the ideal here is to move South Africans to a completely non-racial place where we look at essentially where you are in life and whether or not you need a leg up. So, we want to move to a point where we no longer racially classifying South Africans according to an apartheid sort of a pencil test, right? But at the end of the day, we also have to understand that South Africans still view the world through that prism. And so you've got to accept that, and you've got to be honest about it, and you've got to say to people, in spite of that, what we're saying is that actually, if you're poor black in South Africa, this is actually your best shot. It may seem and feel counterintuitive, but trust me, if you look at the facts of what we've done with public money, did not steal public money, delivered on it, that's actually your best shot.
So trust me, we'll put Boss John in charge, and then it'll all be right, and you guys can all have a job. That's kind of the way it looks.
No, I mean that's not what I'm saying.
No,
And
I do understand. And
Also,
I am,
also don't call him Bas John. I mean,
I'm
like,
just saying, this is South Africa, right? Yeah? Yeah.
no, I mean,
Believe
look,
me, if I'm not, your opposition parties are, right?
no, I get it. I completely get it.
So let's move it along. Let's talk about the coalition talks and the coalition. I'm quite confused. I was a big proponent. We had an event where we had most of the leaders, absent one, John Steenhuisen, on a live event at Empress Palace. Not Empress Palace, at Sandton Convention Centre prior to the meeting. The meeting was held. Everybody seemed to come away there smiling broadly with an agreement in hand, and then subsequently immediately go back to war at local level. Do you think that the coalition talks have made progress? Do you think they're anything to get excited about?
Yeah. So look, I mean, so firstly, I think the Multiparty Charter, collectively as it stands, is sitting at about 35% of the national vote, right? And so, one, as I said to you, it is incumbent on the DA to grow. Because if we want to be the anchor tenant of that, opposition bloc, then we've got to bring in the most amount of votes, and we've got to grow significantly. And of course, the other idea is that other political parties are going to bring in their share of the votes and their chips, and we're going to put these together to get to a 50+1 majority at a national level. But one of the things that I think has been confusing for many people is that the Multi-Party Charter was put together solely to talk about 2024. Because nobody is planning a scenario where we have provincial coalition governments or a national coalition government. In fact, my biggest frustration, even in Parliament, we're not talking about how do we deal with a scenario where we don't have one dominant party. And so that's what those parties have gotten around the table to talk about, to say, right, what are the things that we can agree on, that we can coalesce around, and we can have even a pre-election agreement on. Everybody can agree. The energy crisis, unemployment, poverty, crime. These are the things that are important to these political parties. Corruption. These are the things that are important to these political parties. And this is what we're going to say to South Africans. We already agree that these are the most important issues that are facing you. And we are going to go out there and say, if you have an affinity of voting for the DA, which I think you should, you can vote for other opposition parties too. But please be assured that we will be working together once that election is done to say, let's bring to the table all our chips, and we'll be able to want to put together a 50+1. The reason why I think it's exciting for the first time, Mike, is that one, we've got opposition parties realizing that actually the urgency and the crisis is real. And instead of simply just going off, into your own different directions, I think South Africans are expecting politicians to be a little bit mature and think less about themselves and a lot more about the future of the country. And so I think it's exciting in that way. And I think it's also exciting because for the first time, you can have a pre-election agreement where you are not disagreeing about the fundamentals. That's part of the reason our local government coalitions also couldn't stand the test of time, because there were massive disagreements also about the fundamentals that brought those parties together. And so I think there's something for South Africans to be excited about. Of course, people are asking the question, well, then why don't you already work in the local government space? The problem with that is that those local government coalitions have been fraught with their own different problems. And so one of the things that the leaders agreed to with the Multi-Party Charter is that this is designed to focus solely on 2024 so that we can have a coherent offer as a joint opposition bloc, and we can say to South Africans, we can have a non-ANC government. Things are not going to fall apart. There is an alternative, and this alternative stands for these things.
Well, let's hope so, because I do recall how hard Helen Zille worked when she had, a 13-party coalition.
Yeah.
And now, seemingly the DA can't work with a 4-party or 5-party coalition here in Johannesburg. So clearly there's a bit of a difference in perhaps energy, objective, that the DA was prepared to work so hard in the Western Cape and Cape Town, but not so much in Gauteng. I think that's telling Gautengers a bit about the DA.
No, I think we've tried very, very hard to try and make these coalitions work, but I think there are a couple of things that are significant with, and obviously Helen will tell you about the difficulties of running that coalition government. But here, Mike, we've got a situation where you've got people who are extortionists parading as politicians, because you will have a coalition bloc that is working together, and one or two of the smaller parties will simply be offered either an MMC seat or money to move to the other side. Collapses the coalition government immediately. Now, one of the reasons why I'm saying that South Africa needs to legislate for coalition governments is because we can't, if the instability at a local level that we have seen cannot be replicated at a provincial and a national level. We've got to somehow have, rules of engagements. We've got to have binding legal sort of infrastructure. We've got to know what we're doing. And I think that, it's been trial and error in South Africa. While, we've saw a lot of coalition governments in 2026 and a whole lot more in 2021. And I think it's showed us where the fault lines are. The fault lines are coalition agreements are not binding. The fault lines are the fact that, you've got political parties who can simply just, exchange seats as and when they want. But what I'm saying is that we need to come up with a framework and legislation. And we've done that work. And we're expecting and hoping that, other political parties, including the ANC, will back them as they come to Parliament for a vote in the next coming weeks.
Well, I've got to say, everything you described about the difficulties in putting and keeping a coalition together is what everybody watches us has to put up with daily when you run your business, right? You have to make concessions, you have to deal with people you don't like, you've got various interest groups, you've got to put up with bad legislation, etc., etc. I don't know, I can understand that it's uncomfortable. We'd like it very easy, but it isn't. And sometimes you just got to make things work.
You do.
But
You do.
Siviwe Gwarube, while you're there, we have hope. We have hope, and you're fighting the good fight against a massive ANC majority in Parliament. Keep it up. We'll keep on speaking and hoping to see where the progress comes from. To everybody that's watching us, before you vote in 2024, subscribe to this channel if you haven't.
Absolutely.
And we'll continue to have the parties on here. And you never know, one day we might even get somebody from the ANC or the EFF to return my calls, and then perhaps we could even get them onto this show.
I still say WhatsApp Figile. He loves a camera.
Yeah, he just doesn't like questions, that's all. Right. And I will be getting Fakile's number from Siviwe straight after this. So thank you all for joining us today. Siviwe Gwarube, you've been a great sport. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you the next time on the State of the Nation. Thank you.